I was elbows deep in the engine of a 302 series warship, trying to fix a coolant leak when the sound of something descending from the sky caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just a gust of wind, but then it became a whistling, sharp, high-pitched, and growing louder by the second. My eyes shot up, scanning the sky. It wasn't just the wind. Something was coming. I wiped the grease from my hands with an old rag and squinted against the sun. The object was small, a glint of metal catching the light as it dropped toward the landing pad. I braced myself, expecting some sort of military vessel, maybe a scout ship or a personal craft. But this was nothing like I'd ever seen before. The ship, or whatever it was, had a sleek, iridescent sheen to it, almost like a fluid, liquid surface. It was spherical in shape, maybe the size of a minivan, and it hummed as it descended slowly, almost gracefully, as if guided by some invisible hand. The thing didn't seem to follow the usual laws of gravity. No engines visible, no thrusters, just the quiet whine of something that didn't belong. I reflexively stepped back as the object touched down, nearly slipping on the grease-streaked floor. It landed with a faint thud, like a feather settling. I expected it to be loud, a full-on crash or at least a jarring landing, but no, it was completely silent. Just the hum of something unfamiliar. As I stood there, a little bewildered, the hatch on the side of the craft opened. A ramp extended, and out stepped a small figure, about the size of a human child, maybe a 10-year-old. My first thought was that it was some sort of alien, though my brain had trouble processing it. The figure was thin, with spindly limbs and skin that shimmered in patches of green and silver like scales. It wore a tight, somewhat tattered flight suit, clearly patched together in a few places, and there was something about the way it moved, like it wasn't entirely comfortable in its own body. The alien child took a tentative step forward, only to stumble slightly, one of its feet catching on a loose piece of debris. The thing seemed to wince, but didn't make a sound, except for a soft, mechanical whirring, like the sound of a broken speaker. It wasn't talking. It was just looking at me with wide, curious eyes. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't trained for this kind of thing. Sure, I knew how to repair ships, but repairing alien technology? That was an entirely different beast. I slowly approached the child, wondering if it could understand me. "Hey there, little one," I called out, trying to sound calm despite my racing thoughts. "Looks like you've got a problem." The alien child seemed to perk up at the sound of my voice, its head tilting to one side. It stepped closer to the ship and then pointed to the hull, where I could see a piece of plating had been blown out, exposing tangled wires and sparking circuitry. I looked down at the damage. The craft looked like it had been in some kind of fight, too much wear and tear for something that should have been operating smoothly. It didn't take me long to spot the issue. The cooling vent had been obstructed, probably by space debris, and it had caused a critical failure in the system. The entire power grid was in danger of going offline. I looked back at the alien child, who was now looking at me with a mix of expectation and anxiety. The message was clear. They needed my help. I didn't know why I did it, but I dropped to my knees and started pulling out tools. It wasn't my job to fix alien ships, but something about the situation, this child stranded in front of me, helpless, in need of someone, struck a chord. "Right," I muttered, more to myself than anyone else. "Let's get you fixed up." I opened the panel, exposed the damaged systems, and started working. The alien child didn't speak, but it stood beside me, watching every move I made, its big eyes wide with both curiosity and gratitude. We both knew the stakes. The first few minutes of working on the alien ship were surreal. I wasn't sure what to expect, what kind of tools I would need, how I'd even begin to interface with something this advanced. But as I took stock of the damage, it became clear that the core issue was mechanical, not entirely out of the realm of something I could fix. I wasn't an engineer from the future or some kind of intergalactic genius, but I'd worked on enough busted ships in my time to know the basics. heat, pressure, and the flow of energy. I had no clue what kind of fuel or power the ship ran on, but the wiring? That was universal. The damage to the cooling system was more than just a blockage. The entire conduit had cracked in multiple places, probably from some impact or sudden drop in temperature. I quickly shut off the power before I burned myself, swiping tools out of my bag. I wasn't exactly excited about handling alien tech, but in this case, I didn't have a choice. The kid needed help. The child hovered next to me, quietly observing. I glanced up occasionally, but it didn't speak. There wasn't much I could get from them. No language, no communication, beyond gestures and expressions. They pointed occasionally, gesturing at the ship, their eyes wide, as if trying to explain something I couldn't understand. But I didn't need them to explain. The ship was telling me what was wrong, the way it hummed, the way the metals creaked under my touch. There was a language here that didn't need words. The first step was clearing the vent. The debris was compacted tight, probably years of debris from asteroid fields or space collisions. I'd seen it on human ships before, but this was different, more complex. The materials in the vent had a strange luminescence to them, like they were alive in some way. When I pried it free, the air that rushed out wasn't the kind of cool, sterile flow I'd expect from a ship's cooling system. This air was warm, tinged with something faintly metallic, but also organic, like the ship itself had a pulse. The child seemed to sense my hesitation. They stepped closer, placing a hand on the edge of the ship, their fingertips brushing the hull, as if they were attuned to the same pulse I had felt. Maybe they knew something I didn't. Maybe they understood the ship better than I ever would. But at that moment, I realized this wasn't just a piece of technology. It was alive in a way. Or at least it was symbiotic. There was an odd, subtle interplay between the ship's systems and something else. I shook my head, trying to focus. I didn't have the luxury of overthinking this. I had to repair it, and fast. I found a loose wire leading from the damaged vent, coiled it carefully around a broken component, and used some basic materials from my toolbox to jury-rig a temporary patch. I knew it wasn't a permanent fix, but it would keep the ship from overheating long enough for the child to get somewhere safe. The hum of the engine shifted subtly, like it was aware that something had changed. It pulsed steadily, as if to say, "Thank you," though I knew it wasn't quite that simple. I took a step back and wiped my brow. It was only when I stood up that I realized just how exhausted I felt. Repairing this thing wasn't easy. The child had been quietly standing nearby, watching every step, their big eyes tracking my movements with what I could only describe as a mix of admiration and concern. The ship's systems flickered and sputtered, but it didn't die out. A spark of life, barely enough to keep it going, was now flowing through it again. The ship let out a soft, mechanical whine, like it was waking up from a long sleep. The alien child stepped forward, eyes gleaming with what looked like relief. They placed both hands on the hull, the tips of their fingers glowing faintly, and something strange happened. The ship pulsed again, and the hum turned into a more melodic sound, like a soft chime. The ship was responding to the child. I took a step back, watching in awe as the alien seemed to communicate directly with the ship. It was as if their presence, some kind of bond, was key to its operation. Maybe this wasn't just a ship after all, it was a living thing too, or at least it was part of something bigger. The alien child's connection to it was undeniable. After a moment, the child turned to me, nodding as if to say, "It's done." It was a simple gesture, but it held weight. They didn't speak, but their eyes held a gratitude that words could never capture. Then, without another word, they climbed into the cockpit, and I watched as the ship's lights flickered to life. The child waved once, a tiny wave, before the ship rose gently into the air and drifted off, disappearing into the early morning sky as quietly as it had arrived. I stood there, unsure of what had just happened, staring at the now empty landing pad. Something had shifted in the air, but whether it was because I'd helped them or because they had helped me, I couldn't say. All I knew was this: I had fixed a ship, and it was no ordinary ship. And the kid, they were more than just an alien. They were a part of something much larger, something that felt like it might change everything I thought I knew about the universe. 3 days later, I was sitting in the break room of the dockyards, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee when the transmission came through. I didn't even think to check the ID. The message was short, automated, and cold. Exactly the kind of thing I expected from the higher-ups when I screwed something up. But when the words registered, I felt a chill run down my spine. "You have been fired." I stared at the screen, half expecting it to blink and correct itself. Fired? For what? What had I even done? Sure, I'd helped that alien child, but that wasn't against protocol, was it? I could barely comprehend what I was reading. The message continued. "Your assistance to a foreign entity is considered a breach of protocol. You are hereby relieved of your duties, effective immediately." I was too stunned to speak. The words swam in front of me as I ran them over in my head, trying to make sense of it. I had fixed a ship, granted an alien one, but that wasn't a crime. I wasn't exactly part of the military. I was just a mechanic. We worked on whatever ships came through the yard. Ships that were broken, ships that needed fixing. The coffee in my hand went cold as I slumped back in my chair, my mind racing. Fired. They had fired me for helping a child stranded in a broken ship. In a way, I could understand the reasoning. If the higher-ups knew I'd been involved with an alien entity, especially an unknown one, they might have seen it as a breach of security, of trust. I'd crossed a line without even realizing it. The military wasn't exactly fond of gray areas. They were about control, about following rules, orders, protocols, and I had thrown all of that out the window for what? A kid in need? I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as frustration and anger began to settle in. How could they do this? I'd fixed things that were beyond my expertise, sure, but I'd done it because I had to. No one else was going to help that child. The higher-ups didn't care about that. They cared about control. They cared about rules. So here I was, jobless, a mechanic without a ship to fix, and probably on the military's radar for something I hadn't even done wrong. I powered off the terminal with a decisive click and threw the coffee cup into the trash. The day felt suddenly heavy, the weight of it settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. Outside the window, the sun was setting, casting a soft golden light over the docks. Everything felt a little more empty now. As I started packing up my tools, a strange feeling crept into my gut, a whisper of uncertainty. Maybe I hadn't seen the last of that alien kid. Maybe I hadn't seen the last of this whole mess. But I didn't have time to think too much about it. I was out of a job, and I had no idea where my next paycheck was coming from. No ship to repair, no place to go. The future had become a vast, empty horizon. I left the break room and headed out into the sprawling complex. The hum of ship engines and the dull chatter of other mechanics filled the air, but none of it reached me. I was somewhere else, my mind a million miles away, as I walked through the halls for what felt like the last time. Just as I reached the exit, my comm device buzzed. The notification wasn't from anyone I knew, but I tapped the screen anyway, curious if someone was looking to hire me. The screen flickered for a second before the words appeared. "You've been released from your position, that's true, but don't think you've seen the last of us." The message ended there, no signature, no further explanation. I stood frozen in the hallway, staring at the screen, my heart beating faster. I wasn't sure what it meant, but something about it sent a jolt of unease through me. The message didn't make sense, not in the way it should have, not for a simple firing notice. I had no idea what kind of game they were playing now, but I had a feeling it wasn't over. And somehow, I wasn't done with that alien child, or whatever bigger thing was lurking behind this all. I shoved the device back into my pocket and walked out of the door into the uncertain night ahead. 3 days after the firing, I was sitting in my apartment trying to make sense of everything. The walls were closing in, and the dim light from the low-hanging ceiling lamp only made the place feel smaller. I had no idea what I was supposed to do now. My savings were running low, and no one was going to hire someone who'd just been blacklisted by the military for working with aliens. Even if they were just a kid, my hands, still a bit stained with grease and ship fuel, were beginning to ache from the lack of real work. I couldn't focus. I leaned back in the old chair, staring at the walls. There wasn't much to look at. It was just a basic one-room apartment with a small kitchenette, a cracked bathroom mirror, and the faint smell of metal and stale coffee in the air. I'd lived here for a while now, ever since I'd moved to this outpost on the edge of human space, but it had never felt more isolating than it did now. I picked up my comm device and ran my finger across the screen, scrolling aimlessly through old work messages. Nothing stood out. The usual mechanics offers, the occasional request from the military that I'd had to reject before I'd gotten fired. Then, suddenly, the device buzzed. I froze. It wasn't just a ping from a friend or another job request. This was different. The notification came from an unknown source. The message appeared as soon as I unlocked the device. No sender name, no signature. It was short, almost cryptic. "We've been watching. Meet us at the coordinates." The message disappeared before I could process it. I stared at the screen, trying to understand what I had just read. The words didn't make sense. The tone was cold, but it wasn't threatening. It wasn't even hostile. It was as though someone was asking me to take a step toward something bigger, something unknown. I didn't know if I should feel curious or terrified. A flash of movement from the corner of my eye caught my attention, and when I looked toward the window, I saw a shadow in the street below. For a moment, I thought it might have been my mind playing tricks on me, but the figure was unmistakable. A tall, armored figure standing just outside the building, bathed in the dim glow of the streetlights. It wasn't someone I recognized, but I knew who they were. The same alien from the other day, the one who had appeared with the child, their massive frame looming against the backdrop of the city lights. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I was being pulled toward them. My pulse quickened as I rushed to the window, leaning out for a better view. The figure didn't move, just standing there, looking up at me with an almost knowing expression. And that's when it hit me. The fleet. The ships that had been watching from above for the last few days. The ones I'd seen when I had fixed the child's ship. They hadn't just disappeared. They were still here. I didn't know how they had found me, but they had. And now I was being summoned. A mix of emotions swirled inside me. Fear, curiosity, excitement. The coldness from earlier had melted away, replaced by a burning need to know what all of this meant. What did they want from me? Why was I being called? Without thinking, I grabbed my jacket and slipped on my boots. I didn't know where this would lead, but there was no turning back now. I couldn't shake the feeling that my life, which had felt so mundane and small just a few days ago, was about to change in a way I couldn't possibly understand. I left the apartment and headed toward the street, walking quickly but not running. The city stretched out before me, the buildings towering on either side like silent giants, watching me as I passed. I didn't look back. The armored alien didn't move when I approached. As I drew closer, they nodded, almost like they had been expecting me. The child was nowhere to be seen, but I had no doubt they were nearby. The alien didn't speak, but they turned and started walking in the direction I needed to go. My feet moved without question, following them as though this was all part of some strange, unspoken plan. This wasn't just about fixing a ship anymore. This was something bigger, and whether I was ready for it or not, I was going to be part of it. The walk was silent, the alien's heavy footsteps reverberating against the concrete, but somehow it wasn't uncomfortable. There was an unspoken understanding between us, an understanding I didn't fully grasp but felt deep down. I kept my eyes on the figure ahead of me, my thoughts a tangled mess. The air was cooler now, the city's lights reflecting off the damp pavement as we passed under the occasional flickering street lamp. Everything felt too quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. We walked for what felt like an hour, though it was probably only a few minutes. My legs were burning, but I couldn't stop now. The coordinates on the message had led us to a warehouse district, one that was mostly abandoned, save for a few old rusted ships docked in corners, forgotten or left behind. The area was eerily still. No workers, no maintenance crews, just the distant hum of machines from other parts of the city. When we reached the center of the district, the alien stopped in front of an old, decaying building. The structure looked like it hadn't seen use in years. It was a hulking thing, its walls covered in peeling paint, its windows shattered and boarded up. But as I stood there, staring at it, something shifted in the air. A low, steady vibration that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Without a word, the alien raised one massive hand and placed it against the door. There was a brief, almost imperceptible pulse of light from the fingertips, and then the door creaked open on its own, as if the building itself had been waiting for us. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old machinery and dust. I hesitated, my heart thudding in my chest. "Don't be afraid," the alien finally spoke. The voice was deep, mechanical, distorted, but unmistakably directed at me. "You've been chosen. This is the beginning." I swallowed hard, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Chosen? For what? I wanted to ask, but the words caught in my throat. I wasn't ready for whatever this was. I was just a mechanic. But the message, the strange way I felt drawn to this moment, it all pushed me forward. The alien turned and stepped inside the building, its massive frame disappearing into the darkness. I took a deep breath and followed, my mind racing. Inside, the space was much larger than I expected, filled with technology I couldn't begin to identify. Panels lined the walls, blinking with faint alien symbols that seemed to pulse in time with a low humming sound. In the center of the room stood the child's ship, the same sleek spherical vessel I'd fixed days earlier. But now, it was different. It seemed more alive. The once dull metal now shimmered with an almost liquid quality, and there was a faint, rhythmic pulse coming from the ship, like it had a heartbeat of its own. The alien moved toward it, extending a hand, and the ship responded immediately. The panels on the side lit up, the hull vibrating softly as if it recognized the touch. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was something far more complex, alive maybe, and it was clear now that it was more than just a vessel. It was a part of something. "Do you understand?" the alien asked, its voice soft, almost gentle. "This ship, it's not just a machine, it's a conduit, a vessel for something greater. We've been waiting for someone to repair it, to help it heal." I nodded slowly, though I didn't fully understand what it meant. "You did something that most couldn't," the alien continued, turning to face me. "You repaired it in a way that even we didn't expect. That act, your willingness to help, despite the risks, it showed us something." The room was so quiet now, the air thick with anticipation. My heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't know what they wanted from me, but I was beginning to realize that I wasn't just in over my head. I was in the middle of something vast and inexplicable, something that had nothing to do with anything I'd ever known. And the strange, comforting certainty settled over me that there was no turning back. The alien stepped aside, motioning toward the ship. "The fleet is coming, and they will have questions. But you've earned a place among us. Whether you're ready or not, your life will never be the same again." My mind was reeling. A fleet? I had no idea what I'd gotten myself into, but there was a part of me, deep inside, that couldn't help but feel like this was where I was always meant to be. The moment the alien spoke of the fleet, the weight of the words hit me like a physical blow. It was one thing to be a mechanic, to fix broken ships and tinker with malfunctioning parts, but this was something else entirely. The idea of a fleet coming for me, for the child's ship, felt surreal, as if I had somehow stepped into a story I didn't belong in. But the alien's calm, deliberate tone left no room for doubt. It wasn't a warning, it wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. I stood there in the dimly lit warehouse, my eyes locked on the shimmering vessel. It seemed to pulse with energy now, almost alive, and the hum of its systems reverberated through the air. The space was filled with a quiet tension, a kind of waiting, like something monumental was about to happen, and I was at the center of it. The alien's voice cut through the silence again. "You've already done what we couldn't. The ship was beyond repair when you found it, but your actions, your understanding of its needs, you've brought it back from the brink." I opened my mouth to ask something, anything, but no words came out. My mind was a storm of confusion, fear, and curiosity. What did it mean? Why had they chosen me? What was I supposed to do now? The alien seemed to sense my turmoil. It stepped closer, its large frame casting a shadow across the room. Its expression softened, and for the first time I saw a glimmer of something resembling empathy in its eyes. "We don't ask for much, only that you follow through. You've shown us something remarkable. We have to know if you can continue?" I managed to croak, my throat dry. "Continue with what?" "The path you've started," the alien replied, its voice growing more intense, more purposeful. "You've helped the ship, but it's more than just a machine. It's a part of a larger system, a system we're part of, a system you can be part of too, if you're willing." My heart raced. I felt a flicker of doubt, but it was quickly overshadowed by something else. Something like hope. Or perhaps destiny. This was more than I could have ever imagined, but the pull was undeniable. They were offering me something, an opportunity or a choice, and I had no idea where it would lead. Before I could respond, the air in the room shifted. A low rumble vibrated through the floor beneath my feet, and the walls of the warehouse seemed to ripple as though reacting to an invisible force. I turned instinctively toward the ship, and that's when I saw it. A light, faint at first, but growing brighter with each passing second. The vessel's hull was glowing now, the once dark metal now radiating a soft, ethereal light. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was alive, pulsing with energy, like it was becoming something more than it ever had been. The alien looked at me, its gaze steady. "They're here, the fleet." I didn't know whether to be terrified or in awe. 1,000 questions surged in my mind, but one stood out above the rest. Who are they? I had worked on ships for years, had seen countless pieces of technology and strange vessels, but nothing like this, nothing that felt so otherworldly. The ground shook again, and this time I felt it in my bones. The sound of engines filled the air, a low, throbbing hum that seemed to vibrate through every inch of the building. It wasn't distant. It wasn't faint. The fleet was close. I could feel it now, the weight of their presence pressing down on me. The alien turned to face the ship, its hand once again resting against the smooth, glowing surface. It seemed to communicate with the ship, its fingers moving in a series of intricate gestures, and I felt a strange sensation wash over me. There was a connection between them, between the child, the ship, and this alien race. A connection I could never have understood before. But now, as I stood there, I felt it too. In the distance, beyond the walls of the warehouse, I could see them. Ships, massive and sleek, emerging from the shadows of the night sky. They moved with precision, like a school of fish swimming in perfect harmony. I watched in awe as the first of them settled into the space above, its presence commanding and overwhelming. The fleet had arrived. "They are here for you," the alien said softly, its voice almost reverent. "You have earned your place." I looked up at the ships, a mixture of disbelief and wonder flooding my senses. I had never imagined anything like this was possible. I was a mechanic. I fixed engines, not destinies. But now, it seemed that I had become part of something much larger than I could have ever fathomed. Before I could say anything, the alien spoke again, its tone calm but firm. "You're not just repairing ships anymore. You're repairing the balance. The ship is a piece of something larger, something ancient, and you've become its key." I felt the weight of those words settle on my shoulders, and as I looked up at the glowing ships above, I realized something else. My life had changed forever. The fleet hovered above us, massive and silent, as if waiting for some signal to begin. The light from their engines cast long shadows across the abandoned warehouse district, illuminating the alien ship in front of me like a living creature. The hum in the air was becoming more pronounced, a vibration that seemed to reverberate in my chest, resonating deep within me. My heart was pounding in my ears, and yet there was a strange calmness settling over me. This was no longer a moment of fear or uncertainty. This was something else entirely, a revelation, an awakening. The alien beside me, who I had come to understand was some kind of guardian or envoy for the fleet, watched the ships intently. There was no sign of the child, but I could sense their presence. Their connection to the ship, to the fleet, was something more than just physical. It was spiritual, emotional even. It was as if the child's bond with the vessel was the key to everything, the catalyst that had triggered this entire chain of events. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been walking this path all my life without ever knowing it. I had been fixing ships for years, spending my days in a dingy workshop, surrounded by mechanical parts and tools, thinking I was just another cog in the machine of the universe. But now I understood. I wasn't just fixing ships. I had been fixing something much larger, something much more important. The alien turned to me, its large, glowing eyes locked onto mine. "They are waiting for you," it said. The words were simple, but the weight of them was undeniable. The fleet, these ships, weren't here just to observe. They were here because of me, because of what I had done. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words failed me. I had questions, so many questions, but I couldn't form them, couldn't find the right way to ask. How had this happened? Why me? I was just a mechanic. The alien seemed to read my thoughts. "You've been chosen," it said again, its voice softer this time, almost reassuring. "The ship you repaired was more than just a ship. It is a conduit, a vessel of knowledge and power, and you, through your actions, have unlocked it. You are now a part of something far greater than you ever imagined." The hum of the fleet grew louder, almost deafening, as if the ships were calling to me. The energy around us was thick now, charged with a palpable sense of purpose. The child's ship pulsed once more, and this time I felt it deep within me. An understanding, a knowing. The ship wasn't just a machine. It was alive, a part of something ancient, and I had given it a second chance. It was like, but I had also unlocked something else. Something that I didn't fully comprehend yet, but could feel just beneath the surface of my mind, like a door that was slowly opening. I turned toward the ship, drawn to it, and instinctively placed my hand on the hull. The surface was warm under my touch, and as I made contact, a flood of images and sensations washed over me. I saw flashes of star systems, far-off planets, and civilizations long gone. I felt the weight of history, the weight of time itself, stretching out before me. This ship, this entity, had been a part of it all, witnessing, waiting, and now it had found its way to me, and I to it. The alien watched silently, a faint hint of approval in its eyes. "You understand now," it said. "The path you've begun is not just about the ship or the fleet. It's about the balance of the universe itself. We are a part of a larger system, a system that needs you." I looked back at the fleet, my eyes wide with awe. There were dozens of ships now, hovering above in perfect formation. They seemed almost alive, their lights pulsing like a heartbeat in unison. I had no idea what this all meant or what role I was meant to play in it, but one thing was clear. My life had changed forever. I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was something more. I was part of a story, part of a mission, part of a cosmic dance that spanned beyond the stars. The alien stepped forward, placing a hand on my shoulder in what could only be described as a gesture of solidarity. "You are ready," it said. Ready? Ready for what? But before I could ask, the fleet's engines flared and the first of the ships began to move. It was time. I watched, awestruck, as the ships ascended into the sky, their massive frames disappearing into the vastness of space. The child's ship pulsed again, as if bidding me farewell, or perhaps urging me to follow. And without thinking, I stepped forward, drawn to the unknown, the promise of a future that had only just begun. I didn't know what awaited me in the stars, or what role I would play in this larger narrative. But one thing was certain. I was no longer just a mechanic. I had repaired something far more than a ship. I had repaired a bridge between worlds, between civilizations, and I was ready to cross it.